The hall was buzzing with the electric anticipation that only comes when two worlds are about to collide under the bright glare of cameras. The stage lights burned hot, the crowd leaned forward, and every phone in the room was recording, waiting for the spark. It came in an instant. Karoline Leavitt, face flushed with confidence, turned to Kash Patel and let slip a line that would freeze the air and stain the moment forever. With a sneer that cut sharper than the microphone could capture, she spat the words, "Go back to India." The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that drops after a glass shatters on marble, the kind that makes every heartbeat sound like thunder. The audience stiffened. Some gasped audibly, others covered their mouths. The moderators shifted uncomfortably in their seats, pretending to glance at their notes but knowing something irreversible had just been unleashed. For a fraction of a second, even the cameras seemed to hesitate, their red lights blinking as if the country itself needed to process what it had just heard. Karoline smirked, mistaking the stunned hush for control. She leaned back, satisfied, with her venom. But the crowd's eyes were not on her anymore. They were locked on Kash Patel, a man who had just been told in front of the nation that his belonging could be questioned, that his very place in the country he served could be dismissed with one arrogant phrase. He did not flinch. He did not recoil. He simply sat in stillness, letting the ugliness of her words hang in the air long enough for their weight to reveal itself. In living rooms across America, people froze. Children, watching with their parents, asked quiet questions that broke hearts. Families who had walked their own immigrant journeys clenched their fists, feeling the sting of those words as if they had been directed at them. The insult was not just to one man. It was a dagger, thrust at millions. Karoline's voice may have been singular, but its echo touched every household that ever dreamed of belonging. And then, as the room waited, Kash Patel slowly leaned toward the microphone. The world held its breath. His eyes locked on hers, steady and unshaken. What came next would not only define this night but ripple far beyond it. But no one could have predicted what Kash Patel would say next. The sting of Karoline's words was not contained to that stage. It traveled instantly through the veins of America, carried by television broadcasts, live streams, and the ceaseless current of social media. To some, it was just another debate jab gone too far, but to millions of others, it was a wound reopening, a reminder of every time they had been told, directly or indirectly, that they did not belong in the only country they had ever called home. The insult was not just aimed at Kash Patel, it was aimed at the very idea of America itself. This nation, forged from the courage of those who crossed oceans and borders, who arrived with nothing but hope and sweat, has always been a tapestry of accents, traditions, and names. To tell one man to go back was to unravel that tapestry, thread by thread, to suggest that the promise of America could be revoked with a sneer. It was an attempt to shrink the idea of patriotism into a narrow mold, as if loyalty to the Constitution required a certain skin tone, a certain lineage, a certain silence in the face of hatred. Every immigrant family watching felt the weight of those words. They remembered the whispered slurs in school hallways, the stares in grocery stores, the casual remarks at workplaces that reduced their identities to foreignness. They remembered their parents working 2 jobs, their grandparents saving every penny, their children pledging allegiance to a flag that symbolized not exclusion, but opportunity. When Karoline told Kash Patel to go back, she told them all that their sacrifices were still conditional, that their belonging was still negotiable, and yet there was something even larger at stake. Because this was not just about immigrants. It was about what kind of America we choose to be. Will we be a nation that confuses cruelty for strength, that applauds insults as if they are policy, that weaponizes difference for applause lines? Or will we be a nation that remembers its own promise, that liberty and justice are for all, not just for the few who fit a narrow image of Americanness? The fear was real, but so was the pride. In that silence after Karoline's insult, millions recognized the dignity of restraint. Kash Patel's calm composure spoke louder than her cruelty. It was a reminder that true patriotism is not measured in volume, but in values. It is measured in the quiet resolve to keep faith with the American story even when others try to write you out of it. The stakes stretched beyond Kash, beyond that room, beyond even the election itself. They stretched into classrooms where children would replay this moment in their minds. They stretched into workplaces where colleagues of every background would wonder if they were truly seen. They stretched into kitchen tables where families would discuss, sometimes painfully, what it really means to be American. Karoline's insult was not just an attack on one man. It was a test for the country, and every viewer knew it. Would America turn away, shrug it off as just another soundbite? Or would it seize the moment to declare that dignity, equality, and belonging are not negotiable? The air was thick with that question. The cameras zoomed closer. Kash Patel had yet to answer. But as the nation held its breath, one truth became clear. This was not just his fight. It was ours. And this wasn't the first time Karoline had let arrogance eclipse empathy. Karoline Leavitt didn't stumble into politics. She sprinted into it, fueled by ambition, sharpened by media training, and armed with the confidence of someone who had never truly been tested. To her supporters, she was brash, unapologetic, and refreshingly direct. To her critics, she embodied a new breed of political figure, polished in delivery but reckless in judgment, eager for applause lines even if they came at the expense of decency. From the moment she burst onto the national stage, one thing was clear. Karoline thrived on creating divides. Her rise began with carefully staged appearances, interviews where she leaned heavily on her youth, her so-called authenticity, and her willingness to say what others were too afraid to. She positioned herself as a voice of a forgotten America, but beneath the sound bites was a pattern, a reliance on caricatures and inflammatory language to make her point. Where others offered nuance, she offered slogans. Where others sought dialogue, she sought confrontation. It wasn't long before controversies trailed her. On social media, she brushed off concerns about inclusivity with a smirk, dismissing calls for empathy as woke nonsense. At rallies, she leaned into rhetoric that painted entire communities as outsiders, intruders, or burdens. The us versus them narrative became her weapon of choice, always dividing, never uniting. And for every cheer that erupted in her favor, there were countless groans of disbelief from those who saw her words for what they were, reckless attempts to score points, indifferent to the harm left behind. Reporters noted her contradictions. She spoke of loving freedom, yet flirted with restricting voices she disagreed with. She preached about family values, yet sneered at families whose traditions did not look like hers. She celebrated the Constitution while casually undermining its spirit of equality. And time after time, when pressed on these inconsistencies, she doubled down with arrogance, dismissing her critics as irrelevant, claiming victimhood whenever accountability came knocking. Perhaps the most telling sign of her character was her comfort with cruelty. For Karoline, political theater wasn't just about ideas, it was about domination. When challenged, she didn't engage, she mocked. When presented with facts, she waved them away as propaganda. And when confronted with people whose very existence disrupted her narrative, she reached for the oldest insult in the book, questioning their right to belong. The go-back slur was not born in that debate hall. It was the logical extension of years spent cultivating a brand of politics that thrives on exclusion. It was a phrase whispered in playgrounds, shouted at marches, muttered under breath in workplaces, and now it was being broadcast on national television by someone who sought to lead. It was arrogance crystallized into a single sentence, arrogance that revealed how thin the line is between rhetoric and bigotry when ambition goes unchecked. And yet, for all her bravado, Karoline seemed oblivious to how her words landed outside her echo chamber. She mistook shock for power, forgetting that in politics, the court of public opinion is larger than any debate stage. Each smirk, each dismissive shrug, each "I said what I said" moment chipped away at her credibility among those who believe. Leadership requires more than insults. What made her particularly dangerous wasn't just her language, but her certainty. She carried herself as though America belonged only to her image of it. And anyone who challenged that image could be diminished with a line, erased with a gesture, invalidated with a taunt. It was the certainty of someone who believed that cruelty would always be rewarded with applause, that belittling others was a path to power. That night, as she hurled her words at Kash Patel, she was not improvising. She was playing a role she had carefully cultivated, a disruptor, a fighter, a woman who thought her cutting lines could elevate her to stardom. She believed she was winning in that moment, that the silence was hers to own, that her smirk would be the image replayed across networks. But she miscalculated. Because in that silence, America did not see strength. They saw weakness masquerading as bravado. They saw arrogance so inflated it could not recognize dignity when it was standing directly across the stage. And while Karoline basked in the spotlight, certain she had seized control of the narrative, Kash Patel's journey told a very different story. Long before the glare of cameras and the roar of political arenas, Kash Patel's story began in the quiet determination of an immigrant household. His parents had arrived in America with little more than grit in their pockets and belief in their hearts. A belief that this nation, despite its flaws, offered something worth sacrificing for. They worked jobs that rarely made headlines but always made ends meet. His father's hands bore the calluses of long shifts. His mother's nights were filled with bookkeeping and unpaid hours, and together they stitched a future from the fabric of resilience. Kash grew up watching the sacrifices that defined so many immigrant households. There were no shortcuts, no silver spoons, just discipline, late nights, and the endless refrain that in America, your word and your work ethic were your passport. His childhood was not free of cruelty. On schoolyards, his name was mocked, his skin tone singled out, his heritage twisted into a punchline. Yet instead of breaking him, these moments built a kind of armor, an understanding that dignity was not given, it was earned, and that respect would come only through persistence. Books became his escape, then his weapon. Kash dove into studies, devouring history, civics, and law with a hunger that was never about prestige but about purpose. He wanted to understand the country that had given his family a chance, to grasp its promises and contradictions. His teachers recognized the spark. His classmates sometimes dismissed it. But Kash kept pushing forward, determined that the boy once told he didn't belong would one day stand as proof that he did. That determination carried him through college and law school, where he studied not just the mechanics of justice but the ideals behind it. He didn't pursue the easy path or the lucrative one. Instead, he stepped into public service, entering government work where the paychecks were smaller, but the stakes were infinitely larger. In courtrooms and committee rooms, he built a reputation for diligence, for steadiness, for loyalty to the oath rather than to the applause. Kash served in roles that rarely drew headlines, but were vital to the functioning of democracy. He advised on national security, contributed to oversight, and made the kind of sacrifices that don't trend online but that safeguard the everyday freedoms of ordinary people. He worked long hours under fluorescent lights, poring over documents, crafting arguments, defending principles. He missed birthdays, family dinners, holidays, because duty called, and he answered. Not out of vanity, but out of loyalty to the country that had given his family a place to belong. Those who knew him described a man unshaken by theatrics, uninterested in self-promotion. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but often he was the one people listened to when the shouting subsided. His colleagues admired his discipline, his family admired his humility, and through it all, Kash carried the quiet pride of his parents who had once crossed oceans with nothing and now watched their sons serve the very nation they had entrusted with their lives. For immigrant families across America, his story resonated. It was their story, too. The story of parents who cleaned, cooked, labored, saved, so their children could stand taller. The story of enduring slights and insults, but choosing faith in the American dream anyway. The story of loving a country, even when it didn't always love you back, because hope was stronger than bitterness. Kash Patel embodied that faith. He believed that America's greatness was not defined by those who tried to narrow it, but by those who kept expanding it, through work, through service, through belief that dignity is not negotiable. Every step of his journey, from the schoolyard taunts to the corridors of Washington, reinforced this truth. Belonging is not granted by the arrogant, it is claimed by the steadfast. And so, when Karoline Leavitt sneered across that stage, telling him to go back to India, Kash did not see merely an insult. He saw the echoes of every slight his parents had endured, every cold shoulder his community had faced, every immigrant family who had been told they were less than. He knew her words were bigger than her own arrogance. They were a test of everything he and his family had fought for. But he also knew something else. He knew the long nights, the sacrifices, the relentless perseverance had prepared him for precisely this moment. He knew that his story was not one of bitterness, but of resilience, not of exclusion, but of contribution. And he knew that the best response to hate was not fury, but dignity. Kash Patel's life had already answered Karoline's insult long before she ever delivered it. His presence on that stage was proof of it. His career, his service, his family's sacrifices, all stood as testimony that America belongs to those who build it, not those who try to tear it apart with words. And it was these very struggles that prepared him for the moment of truth. The debate hall had not recovered from Karoline's venomous insult, but the moderators pressed on, desperate to salvage control. Their voices cracked slightly as they read the next question, their eyes darting nervously between the two candidates. The crowd, once buzzing with casual chatter, now bristled with a nervous edge, as if everyone knew the night had crossed into uncharted territory. Karoline seized the moment with the confidence of someone who mistook silence for approval. She leaned forward, her smile sharpened and doubled down. She dressed her insult in new clothing, weaving it into policy arguments and patriotic catchphrases. How can someone advise on American security, she demanded, when they don't even understand what it means to be truly American? Her words were wrapped in rhetoric, but the poison was clear. Every sentence became a jab, meant to delegitimize Kash Patel's very identity. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some clapped, a smattering of applause from corners where resentment found comfort. But others groaned audibly, their disapproval cutting through the tension. The moderators attempted to pivot, but Karoline was relentless, interrupting, circling back to her insult like it was a lifeline. She believed repetition would solidify her dominance, that the more she pressed the attack, the more the audience would absorb it as truth. Kash Patel, however, sat in stillness. He didn't fidget. He didn't rush to defend himself. Instead, he absorbed every word, every pointed glance, every mocking tone, with a calm that made the tension unbearable. His composure was its own form of resistance, a silent reminder that dignity often looks like patience. His eyes did not narrow with anger, they widened with clarity. He let her talk, let her sharpen her own arrogance into a blade so reckless it would inevitably cut her credibility. The cameras loved it. They zoomed in on Karoline's flushed face as she spoke over moderators, cutting off questions, gesturing theatrically as if she were commanding an empire. Then they cut to Kash, seated still, hands folded, his expression unreadable but firm. The contrast could not have been clearer. Arrogance in motion, dignity at rest, and the audience could feel it. Parents watching at home shifted uncomfortably, as Karoline mocked, knowing their own children had once faced the same tone. Immigrants across the country clenched their jaws, recognizing the familiar strategy of belittling difference. And even some of Karoline's own supporters began to sense that what played well as bravado in private now reeked of cruelty under the unforgiving glare of national lights. As the exchanges wore on, the imbalance grew obvious. Kash's silence became louder than Karoline's insults. Every time she pressed, the crowd's reaction fractured further. Her applause dwindled, his dignity grew. Viewers at home flooded social media, their posts buzzing with disbelief. Did she really say that? Is she serious? Why isn't he fighting back? They didn't realize he was fighting back, just not in her style. Inside the hall, the pressure mounted. Karoline tried to provoke, raising her voice, pointing fingers, daring him to snap. She needed him to lose composure, to match her vitriol, to meet ugliness with ugliness. But he refused. He simply breathed, gathering calm energy like a storm that was not yet visible but could be felt in the charge of the air. By the final exchange of that segment, the moderators looked exhausted, Karoline looked triumphant, and the audience looked divided. Yet beneath the surface, a current was shifting. The patience of Kash Patel was no accident. It was the stillness before the crescendo, the silence that makes an orchestra's first note thunderous. And then, with the world watching, he leaned into the microphone. The microphone sat inches away from him, gleaming under the bright lights, almost daring him to break the silence. Kash Patel inhaled slowly, his composure unshaken, his eyes steady as they swept across the room. The crowd leaned forward. Karoline smirked, convinced he was cornered. But the expression on Kash's face told a different story. It was not the look of a man defeated. It was the look of a man about to turn the entire debate on its head. His voice, when it came, was calm. Low at first, deliberate, as if each word was chosen not merely for sound but for permanence. Karoline says I should go back, he began, pausing just long enough for the weight of the insult to hang once more in the air. The crowd shifted uneasily. But let me tell you where I come from. He leaned closer and the cameras tightened on his face. I come from parents who left everything behind to give their children a shot at the American dream. I come from nights when my father worked double shifts so I could buy textbooks, from mornings when my mother counted coins to make sure we could afford the school lunch line. I come from the classrooms where teachers told me to speak up because my perspective mattered. I come from the courtrooms and the offices where I dedicated myself to serving this country, not for applause, but for duty. The room was silent. Now, except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the whir of cameras. Kash continued, his tone rising not in anger but in conviction. I have spent my entire life proving that America is not about where your ancestors were born. It's about what you give back to the nation you love. And every single day, I have given back. I have served in government. I have advised on national security. I have protected the very freedoms that allow Karoline to stand here tonight and insult me. The crowd erupted in applause, sharp and sudden like thunder breaking after an unbearable stillness. Karoline's smile faltered. She shifted in her seat, pretending to scribble notes, but the flush on her face betrayed her discomfort. Kash paused, letting the moment breathe, then pressed forward. You tell me to go back, Karoline. But my question is, back to where? Back to the courtroom where I fought for justice? Back to the committee rooms where I worked to defend our Constitution? Back to the hallways of government where I missed family dinners because I was serving the American people? His words cut like glass, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Gasps swept through the audience. Even those who came in skeptical found themselves nodding, swept into the current of his calm defiance. Kash's voice deepened, his cadence steady, almost sermon-like. This country belongs to all of us who believe in it. It belongs to the farmer in Iowa, the teacher in Detroit, the nurse in Texas, the immigrant family in New Jersey who still believes that hard work is enough. It belongs to the soldier who serves on the front lines, the parent who works 2 jobs, the child who studies late into the night because their dream is bigger than their obstacles. He glanced at Karoline, his eyes unwavering. And it belongs to me. I am just as American as anyone on this stage, not because of my skin, not because of my heritage, but because of my loyalty to this nation's ideals. That loyalty cannot be measured by insults. It is measured by sacrifice. The applause grew louder, echoing off the walls until even the moderators had to raise their hands for quiet. Kash waited, poised, letting the wave of validation crest before continuing. Karoline, when you tell someone to go back, what you're really saying is that they don't belong. But belonging in America isn't a gift handed down by politicians. It is earned by every family that chooses to believe in this country despite its flaws. It is earned by those who show up, who work, who sacrifice, who fight for a better future. You cannot erase us with words because our lives are written into the very fabric of this nation. The audience leapt to its feet, a standing ovation breaking mid-speech. Phones flashed, capturing the moment that would soon travel across every screen in the country. Karoline sat frozen, her earlier bravado now shrinking under the magnitude of his calm dismantling. And then, Kash delivered the line that would echo far beyond the walls of that debate hall. You can tell me to go back, Karoline, but the truth is this. I never left. I am here. I belong here. I am America. The roar that followed shook the stage. Some in the crowd were crying, others pumping fists, others chanting his name. Social media feeds exploded in real time, hashtags already forming as the clip of his words began racing around the internet. Kash raised a hand, signaling for quiet, and closed with a flourish that was less a rebuttal than a lesson. This country is not defined by those who try to divide us. It is defined by those who believe in unity, dignity, and the simple idea that freedom belongs to all of us. I will never apologize for being American, and I will never stop fighting for the America that belongs to everyone. By the time he leaned back, the crowd was on its feet again, cameras catching every angle, reporters scribbling furiously. Karoline avoided his gaze, her once proud smirk gone, replaced by the unmistakable unease of someone who realized the narrative had slipped away. It was a mic drop without theatrics, a counterattack without cruelty, a lesson wrapped in patriotism and dignity. Kash Patel had taken the lowest insult and transformed it into the highest affirmation of belonging. The audience knew they had just witnessed more than a debate moment. They had witnessed history. But the impact of his words didn't stop in that room. The moment Kash Patel leaned back from the microphone, the debate stage was no longer the epicenter of the story. It was the ignition point of a cultural wildfire. Within minutes, the clip of his rebuttal was being sliced, captioned, and shared across every platform. On Twitter, the hashtag #WeAreAmerica shot to the top of the trending list, pushed by ordinary citizens, journalists, and celebrities who felt the force of his words reverberate through their screens. The video spread with lightning speed. One edit highlighted the exact second Karoline's smirk faltered, looping it alongside Kash's calm declaration, "I never left. I am here. I belong here. I am America." Another edit paired his speech with swelling orchestral music, turning the debate moment into a cinematic trailer for resilience. Memes followed, images of Kash with the American flag in the background, juxtaposed against Karoline's stunned expression, stamped with captions like "Dignity wins" and "Belonging cannot be erased." On Instagram and TikTok, young immigrants stitched their own stories onto Kash's words. Teenagers recorded videos about their parents' sacrifices. First-generation college students filmed themselves wiping tears as they repeated his line, "I am America." The ripple wasn't confined to politics. It touched culture, identity, and pride. Millions who had never before watched a political debate now engaged because they felt personally validated. News anchors scrambled to cover it. On cable networks, the segment replayed over and over, commentators dissecting not only Karoline's insult, but the sheer composure of Kash's response. Some called it the defining debate moment of the year, others a masterclass in dignity. Conservative-leaning outlets tried to spin, suggesting Kash was overreacting, but the footage betrayed the obvious: the raw cruelty of the insult and the transcendent calm of the rebuttal made spin nearly impossible. Celebrities added fuel. A-list actors tweeted in support. Musicians posted Kash's words on their stories with emojis of fire and applause. A famous athlete shared, "This is what leadership looks like." Even politicians across party lines, usually cautious about weighing in, were compelled to respond. Some praised his patriotism, others condemned Karoline's divisiveness, and a few tried to straddle the middle. But the cultural tide was clear. Kash's moment belonged not just to him, but to the millions who saw themselves reflected in his answer. The impact reached everyday life. In classrooms, teachers played the clip and sparked discussions about identity, belonging, and the meaning of patriotism. In offices, workers huddled around phones, replaying the exchange. In homes, parents pointed to the television and told their children, "This is why we never let anyone tell us we don't belong." Karoline, meanwhile, faced a storm of backlash. The same smirk that once seemed like confidence was now repackaged into countless viral memes, each one amplifying her arrogance. Headlines skewered her with phrases like, "The insult heard around America," and "When arrogance meets its match." Her team tried damage control, issuing statements about being misunderstood, but the country had already decided what they had seen and heard. For Kash, the wave was humbling, but undeniable. He had walked into that debate as a man defending himself against an ugly insult, and he had walked out as a symbol of resilience. Yet what made the moment powerful wasn't just the praise. It was the validation it gave to millions who rarely saw their dignity defended on such a public stage. Social. Media turned into a collective town hall of stories. One post read, "My parents came here with nothing. When Kash said, 'I never left,' I felt every sacrifice they made." Another, "I've heard 'go back' my whole life. Tonight, someone answered for all of us." The hashtag #We'reAmerica wasn't just a trend. It was a declaration, a movement, a rallying cry that stitched together voices from every corner of the country. Even rivals couldn't ignore it. A seasoned commentator admitted on air, "I may disagree with Kash on policy, but tonight he reminded us what patriotism looks like." That acknowledgement, coming from across the aisle, underscored the depth of the moment. It wasn't about partisanship anymore. It was about identity, belonging, and the soul of America. And yet, amid the flood of headlines, viral clips, and praise, the most powerful moment of the aftermath wasn't digital. It wasn't a trending hashtag or a celebrity endorsement. It was something far more personal, far more human. Yet the most powerful moment came not from a headline, but from Kash himself. In the days that followed, as the dust settled from the debate and the noise of headlines began to fade, Kash Patel's words lingered like an anthem that refused to be forgotten. He had been confronted with the oldest, ugliest kind of insult, one that sought to shrink his identity to the size of a border. And yet, instead of striking back with bitterness, he had chosen something larger, something timeless: dignity. Kash understood that moments like these outlive the arena. They are replayed in classrooms, remembered at dinner tables, whispered into the ears of children who wonder if they truly belong. He knew that his response wasn't only about defending himself, it was about defending the millions of others whose loyalty to this nation is questioned simply because their names, their faces, or their family stories do not fit into a narrow definition of American. So he spoke again, not with the sharpness of anger, but with the clarity of conviction. America is not about exclusion, he said in interviews and town halls that followed. It is about inclusion. It is not about where your family started. It is about what you choose to build here. The measure of belonging is not bloodline, it is belief. And belief in freedom, equality, and justice is what makes us American. His words resonated because they tapped into something deeper than politics. They reminded the country of its unfinished promise that the phrase, "we the people," has always been aspirational, stretching to include more voices, more faces, more stories with each generation. Kash made it clear that no insult, no matter how sharp, could undo that trajectory. Hate might score a headline, but dignity rewrites the story. Communities responded in kind. At rallies, people held signs that read, "Dignity is patriotism," and "We belong." Parents told their children that Kash's answer was proof that no one could strip them of their Americanness. Teachers incorporated his speech into civics lessons about resilience. And ordinary Americans, immigrants, veterans, farmers, students, saw in his composure a reflection of the values they wanted to claim as their own. Kash never portrayed himself as a victim. Instead, he framed the insult as a gift, an opportunity to remind the nation of its moral compass. By rising above the smear, he showed that true strength is not in tearing others down, but in lifting ideals up. His calm had not been weakness. It had been discipline. His restraint had not been silence. It had been strategy. And his words had not been mere rebuttal. They had been a declaration of belonging. The moral became undeniable. America is strongest when it embraces, not when it excludes. Every insult hurled at difference is a test of our national character, and every dignified answer is a chance to pass it. In Kash's story, millions saw the truth that belonging is not a permission slip granted by the arrogant. It is a birthright of belief written into the very idea of the Republic. And so, while Karoline's words may have been intended to wound, they ended up backfiring. She revealed only her smallness. Kash revealed something far greater. That dignity is louder than hate. That patriotism is deeper than prejudice. That America's promise belongs to all who claim it through love and sacrifice. As the weeks passed, his answer echoed still, across airwaves, across dinner tables, across the hearts of families who finally felt seen. It was not the insult that lived on. It was the dignity that replaced it. It was the universal truth that America, despite its divisions, still has the power to rise above the noise when reminded of who we truly are. And in the end, it wasn't Karoline's insult that echoed across America. It was his answer. The debate began with arrogance on full display, an insult so sharp it sought to cut through Kash Patel's very identity. "Go back to India," Karoline Leavitt sneered, convinced those words would dominate the night. But what unfolded instead was a reversal as cinematic as it was moral. The insult collapsed under the weight of dignity. Kash did not shout. He did not crumble. He stood steady, turned her attack inside out, and reminded America that belonging is not hers to grant. It is ours to claim. That is the story we carry forward. Arrogance loses. Dignity wins. Time and again, history has shown that insults may make noise, but it is the steady voice of truth that endures. Kash Patel's response wasn't just about defending himself. It was about defending the millions who have been told they don't belong, and about reaffirming that this country is built not on exclusion, but on the shared dream of freedom. And now the question comes to us. What do we do with this moment? Do we allow it to fade into just another headline, or do we turn it into a movement? Do we shrug and scroll on, or do we amplify the message that dignity is our strength, that belonging is our right, that America is for all who believe in its ideals? If this moment stirred something in you, don't let it stop here. Share this story. Subscribe so you never miss the next fight for dignity. Add your voice to the millions already declaring, "We are America," because in the end, the insult will be forgotten. But the answer, the calm, steady, unshakable answer, will live on as proof that unity is stronger than hate, and that the American dream belongs to us all.